Wednesday, September 16th, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention testifies to Congress on when the country can expect a significant impact from any of the coronavirus vaccines currently under development.
If you're asking me when is it going to be generally available to the American public so we can begin to take advantage of vaccine to get back to our regular life, I think we're probably looking at third.
But President Trump immediately dismisses the CDC's head testimony, calling him confused and again predicting a vaccine will be ready to roll before Election Day. Hundreds of thousands of people without power and rain falling by buckets as slow-moving Hurricane Sally finally comes ashore at the Florida-Alabama state line. Democrats demanding an investigation of what may be forced sterilizations at a private immigration detention center in the state of Georgia. The Trump administration agrees to provide in-person briefings on threats to the November election to key members of Congress. Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe agreeing to brief the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, backing down from a decision to provide information only in writing. And the San Jose City Council votes to let the police continue to use rubber-coated steel bullets for crowd control, with only Mayor Sam Liccardo dissenting. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles. This is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. President Donald Trump says a safe and effective coronavirus vaccine could be ready for distribution as early as mid-October, with vaccines available for the general public very soon after that. Trump's rosy prediction today came in contradiction to his own public health experts, who told a Senate committee a vaccine could be widely available in the summer or the fall of next year. Meanwhile, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden weighed in on the issue at a news conference on a COVID vaccine today, saying he trusts scientists and vaccines, but does not trust President Trump. Christopher Martinez has the story.
Trust in science, in public health experts, and in political leaders has often seemed rather dicey in the current political environment. Now, in the midst of a deadly global pandemic, that can be a big problem, and all the more so in the race to find a vaccine against COVID-19. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden put it succinctly in a campaign briefing on COVID-19 and vaccine development.
So let me be clear. I trust vaccines, I trust scientists, but I don't trust Donald Trump. And at this moment, the American people can't either.
Biden made his remarks shortly after top federal health officials testified about the pandemic at a hearing of a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee. Dr. Robert Redfield is director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He answered a question about when a vaccine could be available to the general public.
I think there will be vaccine that initially be available sometime between November and December, but very limited supply and will have to be prioritized. If you're asking me when is it going to be generally available to the American public so we can begin to take advantage of vaccine to get back to our regular life, I think we're probably looking at late second quarter, third quarter, 2021.
President Donald Trump, of course, would like to see a vaccine sooner than next summer. Well, so would everybody. But for Trump, his re-election could hang in the balance. In a news conference at the White House, Trump offered his own timeline for a vaccine.
So as soon as it is announced, we'll be able to start. That'll be from mid-October on. Maybe a little bit later than that, but we'll be all set. So as soon as it's given the go-ahead, they're doing trials, as you know, and as soon as it's given the go-ahead, we will get it out, defeat the virus.
Trump's timeline is far different from Dr. Redfield's, but Trump can explain that.
I think he made a mistake when he said that. It's just incorrect information.
Trump insisted several times that his timeline was correct and that Dr. Redfield was mistaken. That led one reporter to ask a follow-up question.
Do the American people trust you on the pandemic when you're contradicting the head of the CDC and your
Because of the great job we've done, because of the great things we've done in other fields also.
Trump says distribution of a vaccine will move rapidly, with the military taking a leading role. But many public health experts have expressed fears that political pressure could lead to premature release of a vaccine that is not yet proven safe and effective. Trump claims Democrat Biden and his allies are responsible for casting doubts on a vaccine. Trump made that claim in his White House briefing.
And we're fighting a very powerful party with a poor candidate, in my opinion, but we're fighting a very, very powerful party, and they're partners with the media, and because they're working together very closely, and they only started hitting on the vaccine. When they hit on the vaccine, they only hit on it when they realized that, wow, this is amazing. They may have it even before the election. All of a sudden, they didn't like the vaccine so much.
As for Biden, he says people are not ready to take advice from someone who once suggested injecting bleach to treat COVID-19. Biden has praise for the scientists.
These scientists carry the hopes of our nation, our entire nation, and the entire world. When their work comes to fruition, and it will, there will be no doubt it will save lives. But scientific breakthroughs don't care about calendars any more than the virus does. They certainly don't adhere to election cycles. And their timing, their approval, and their distribution should never, ever be distorted by political considerations. They should be determined by science and safety alone.
Biden says once a vaccine makes it through the crucial Phase 3 clinical trials, there must be transparency about its safety, its effectiveness, and the independence of scientists making the decision whether to go ahead with a vaccine. At the end of his talk, Biden closed with a variation on the traditional God Bless America line.
God bless our scientists and researchers and our frontline workers. And may God protect our troops.
Reporting for Pacifica Radio News KPFA, I'm Christopher Martin.
In his news conference today, Trump also disagreed with Dr. Robert Redfield about the effectiveness of protective masks, which the president almost never wears, and said he'd telephoned Redfield to tell him so. The Navajo Nation's decision to participate in a trial for a vaccine for the coronavirus has sparked controversy. Antonia Gonzalez of National Native News reports.
Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez addressed concerns about the tribe taking part in COVID-19 vaccine trials. In a virtual town hall Tuesday, Nez urged Navajo citizens to look at the bigger picture, saying it's for the betterment of the future and the Navajo Nation.
I know there's a lot of comments about guinea pigs, using us as guinea pigs, and people saying that, why are you allowing this to happen? You know, throughout this country, there have been many viruses that have plagued us as human beings. And there have been people who have utilized their own bodies to find cures for these types of viruses.
He says no one's being forced to participate. The trials are being offered on a voluntary basis.
And so if people, Navajo people, want to volunteer to try these vaccination clinical trials for COVID-19, then I don't think we should stand in the way. There are thousands of people that are signing up for clinical trials so that people don't have to go through this virus. And those that have gone through this virus know it's not a fun experience.
Nez says he'll host a town hall Monday with Dr. Anthony Fauci, a top U.S. health official, to discuss COVID-19 and trial vaccines. The Navajo Nation is taking part in a Pfizer vaccine trial led by Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. Enrollment will begin in mid-September for people between ages 18 to 85 who have not had a prior COVID-19 infection. They'll receive 2 doses of the vaccine and be monitored for 2 years. As of Tuesday, the Navajo Nation reported 5 new cases of COVID-19, bringing the total number of positive cases to 9,982.
I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
At a town hall meeting last night, President Trump denied he played down the threat of the coronavirus earlier this year, despite the existence of an audio recording of him saying exactly that. Trump also continued to cast doubt on the widely accepted scientific conclusions of his own administration, strongly urging the use of face coverings, saying there are people that don't think masks are good. Trump participated in a televised town hall with uncommitted voters, hosted by ABC News' George Stephanopoulos. Trump also suggested the coronavirus would disappear without a vaccine.
We're going to be okay, and it is going away, and it's probably going to go away now a lot faster because of the vaccine. It would go away without the vaccine, George, but it's going to go away a lot faster with it.
It would go away without the vaccine?
Sure, over a period of time. Sure, with time it goes
many
away.
deaths.
And you'll develop herd, like a herd mentality. It's going to be herd developed.
Trump apparently meant herd immunity. Some estimates say that the U.S. would need to experience 197 million coronavirus infections and nearly 3 million deaths to reach herd immunity to COVID-19 without a vaccine. COVID-19 has killed a reported 196,000 people in the U.S. so far. The Trump administration health official accused of doctoring the government's coronavirus response is taking a 60-day leave of absence, which removes him from office for the remainder of the presidential campaign. The Department of Health and Human Services said in a statement that Michael Caputo is taking the time to focus on his health and family. Caputo is the department's top spokesman. He apologized today to his staff for a bizarre Facebook video in which he accused government scientists battling the coronavirus of conspiring against President Trump and warned of an armed insurrection breaking out if Trump were to lose the November election. Caputo also was accused of trying to muzzle a scientific weekly publication for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The magazine Scientific American has made a presidential endorsement for the first time in its 175-year history, choosing Joe Biden. Scientific American's editorial says the evidence and the science show that Donald Trump has badly damaged the U.S. and its people because he rejects evidence and science. It says the most devastating example is his dishonest and inept response to the COVID-19 pandemic. He's also attacked environmental protections, medical care, and the researchers and public science agencies that help the country prepare for its greatest challenges. That's according to the magazine. The publication says Biden has a record of following the data and being guided by science. California officials say the state won't consider removing college students' virus cases from a county's data because they are part of a community and can contribute to the spread of the illness. The issue arose as San Diego County has seen more than 700 cases among college students and others that have helped drive up infections. The county's chief administrative officer has said she would ask the state to exclude San Diego State University cases from its count. But Governor Gavin Newsom says he's not considering that. While California has seen virus infections slow in recent weeks, San Diego County has recorded a recent increase, which could lead to additional restrictions on its businesses. And while California's coronavirus infection rate has reached its lowest level since the early days of the pandemic, and San Francisco has had among the lowest rates of any large county for months, it's keeping many restrictions in place. Yesterday, Mayor London Breed urged residents to continue wearing masks as the city allows nail and hair salons, spas, personal training indoors at gyms, and other businesses to reopen indoors. But she said she doesn't want to have to reverse course and close businesses again.
We don't want to turn back the clock. So I know those businesses are going to be working hard to stay open. They're going to be following the guidelines, and we need your cooperation too in not only supporting these businesses and following the guidelines within those businesses, but following the guidelines outside of your everyday life. This is just what's necessary in order to make sure that we don't turn the clock backwards.
San Diego County, the state's second largest, is seeking an increase in cases that could shut down some recently reopened businesses. You're listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. Hurricane Sally lumbered ashore near the Florida-Alabama state line today with 105-mile-an-hour winds and rain measured in feet, not inches, swamping homes and forcing the rescue of hundreds of people as it pushed inland for what could be a slow and disastrous drenching across the deep south. Moving at just 3 miles an hour, or about as fast as a person can walk, the storm made landfall at 4:45 a.m. close to Gulf Shores, Alabama, about 30 miles from Pensacola, Florida. It accelerated to a light jog as it battered the Pensacola and Mobile, Alabama metropolitan areas, encompassing nearly 1 million people. It cast boats onto land or sank them at the dock, flattened palm trees, peeled away roofs, blew down signs, and knocked out power to more than 500,000 homes and businesses. Sarah Walton reports.
Hurricane Sally made landfall in Alabama and the Florida Panhandle just before dawn on Wednesday morning. The slow-moving storm has brought at least 15 inches of rain, combined with surging sea levels, and rescues have been carried out from flooded homes along the Gulf shores. Police in Florida have warned that strong winds are leading to hazardous flying debris and have asked people to stay off the roads. More than 500,000 customers have also lost power. The storm is now expected to head northwest towards Atlanta. I'm Sarah Walton in New York.
By early this afternoon, Sally had weakened into a tropical storm with winds down to 70 miles an hour. Showers still fell in parts of the stricken area this evening, and the storm was expected to generate heavy rain farther inland tomorrow as it moved over Alabama and into Georgia. Florida Governor Rick DeSantis.
The impact of the storm has been severe, particularly in areas like Escambia and Santa Rosa County, and particularly with regard to flooding. Some areas have received up to 30 inches of rainfall, with more coming down throughout this evening. And even as the storm moves into Georgia, the rain will continue to come down into our rivers to cause more flooding and potentially even necessitate further evacuations. So far, nearly 600 search and rescue missions have been conducted.
City officials in Orange Beach, Alabama, said they received 120 calls after midnight from people whose homes had been flooded by Hurricane Sally. The mayor said between 50 and 60 people were rescued, but there were also people they couldn't reach because of high waters. He said they were safe in their homes. Baldwin County emergency management official Jenny Gray told CNN rescue officials were prepared to move in as soon as the water receded, and it was safe to do so.
The storm is still incredibly impacting our area, so the eye is moving across our county. We're still seeing tons of rain and wind all across our area. The important safety messages that we want to make sure that we convey to our people right now is please stay put. We have serious conditions along our roadways and a lot of road debris, a lot of trees down at this time. We really want to make sure that people are staying safe and staying off of our roadways. We have been informed from the National Weather Service that we're going to continue to see these conditions throughout the day.
The National Hurricane Center said historic and catastrophic flooding is unfolding, with up to 35 inches of rain expected in some places. A week after a 3-judge panel blocked an order from President Donald Trump seeking to exclude people in the United States without authorization from the numbers used to redraw congressional districts, the Trump administration today gave notice it intends to appeal. It wasn't immediately clear whether an appellate court or the U.S. Supreme Court would get the case, since the Trump administration filed notices for both courts. Either way, the case is likely to end up at the Supreme Court. A panel of 3 federal judges in New York last week said Trump's order was unlawful. The judges prohibited Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, whose agency oversees the U.S. Census Bureau, from excluding people in the country illegally when handing in 2020 census figures used to calculate how many congressional seats each state gets in a process known as apportionment. The judges said that those in the country without authorization qualify as persons to be counted in the states they reside. Opponents of Trump's order said it was an effort to suppress the growing political power of Latinos in the U.S. and to discriminate against immigrant communities of color. They also said undocumented residents use the nation's roads, parks, and other public amenities and should be taken into account for any distribution of federal resources. After Trump issued the order in July, around a half dozen lawsuits around the U.S. were filed by states, cities, immigrant advocates, and civil rights groups challenging its legality and constitutionality. In Ohio, a coalition of advocacy groups wants that state's senators to get behind efforts to extend the 2020 census deadline by 4 months. Mary Sherman has that story.
October 31st was set as the counting deadline, but the Census Bureau recently announced that the date was moved ahead to September 30th. The Trump administration said the change is needed in order to deliver final numbers to Congress by their December 31st deadline. Catherine Unger is with the Children's Defense Fund Ohio, which is part of the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition. She explains that outreach groups need more time to ensure full participation.
The process for an accurate 2020 census has been significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Bureau's decision to cut short by a month's census non-response follow-up and self-reporting will deprive people in our state from being counted and reflected in the portrait of Ohio.
The coalition is urging the U.S. Senate to extend the statutory reporting deadlines for the count by 4 months in the next COVID relief package. Meanwhile, a federal court hearing will be held on Friday in California challenging the deadline change. A recently leaked internal Census Bureau document revealed concerns that the shortened count timeline would increase the risk of serious errors. Ohio received roughly $56 billion in 2017 in federal funds tied to census data. Unger says the financial impact of an undercount would be catastrophic to transportation funding, community development, and programs that protect children, such as Medicaid and Head Start.
At a time during COVID, when Ohio is already at risk of having a $2.4 billion shortfall in state funding, we should really be doing everything we can to make it secure our fair share of the federal resources.
Ohio's total response rate's currently about 94%, slightly higher than the national rate of enumerated households. Unger says for every person in Ohio who is not counted, up to $1,700 in federal funding is left on the table. For Public News Service, I'm Mary Sherman.
The Census Bureau says that last year was the best on record for median household income in the United States. The country also recorded its lowest official poverty rate. But there was a troubling sign in an increasing number of uninsured people. All that data now upended by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic this year. Linda Corey reports.
Before the coronavirus pandemic hit and the U.S. economy plummeted, median household income was the highest ever on record, nearly $69,000. Despite that positive trend, the number of people with health care coverage declined as President Trump and Republicans began to whittle away at the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Aviva Arendine at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities points to the Census Bureau statistics, what's known as the ACS American Community Survey.
The ACS shows that 1.1 million more Americans were uninsured than in 2018, and 2.3 million more were uninsured compared to 2016, including over 700,000 children. 2016 is when the U.S. uninsured rate reached its lowest level in history, a few years after the ACA's major coverage programs took effect. The uninsured rate remains far below its pre-ACA level, but the last 3 years have eroded about 10% of the coverage gain.
Hispanics saw the greatest jump in the uninsured of any racial or ethnic group, going from 17.9% in 2018 to 18.7% in 2019. Aaron Dine cited the four main reasons for the increase in uninsured numbers. First, the Trump policies like the, quote, public charge rule created a climate of fear and discouraged many immigrants from seeking health care access. In deciding whether to grant some applicants a green card or a visa, an immigration officer must decide whether that person is likely to become dependent on certain government benefits in the future, which would make them a, quote, public charge. Another factor that contributed to a lower rate of insured Americans was the administration's support for new state policies that made it harder for people to enroll or stay enrolled in Medicaid. Aaron Dine also says the Trump administration rolled back critical ACA provisions, such as the federal mandate to have health insurance or pay a penalty. In addition, outreach assistance was also cut back by almost 90% since 2016. While the data illustrates that the lower to middle income groups benefited from a stronger economy in 2019, they have also been the most negatively impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Jared Bernstein at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities says what he calls the, quote, Zoom class of white-collar workers who can work from home have largely been spared the economic upheaval. In fact, he says that the stock market and other indicators may signal that some white-collar workers may be financially benefiting from the pandemic. Bernstein says the unemployment rate gives a fuller picture than the stock market of where the economy is headed.
If you simply glance at economic aggregates, retail sales, or aggregate job gains without considering who's getting the jobs, you are at risk, or the quality of those jobs, you are at risk of believing we're much more on our way out of the woods than is the case. In fact, if you look at even the most optimistic forecasts, you'll find they suggest it will be years before getting back to full employment. And it is precisely these slack conditions that are so damaging to the living standards and the opportunities available to the most economically vulnerable people and their communities.
Median household income last year may have been the highest on record, but analysts at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities predict that the 2020 census numbers on poverty, unemployment, and on the uninsured will look vastly different than those of 2018 and 2019. COVID-19 has highlighted the racial and economic inequalities experienced by Americans. And if Congress doesn't take decisive action, these disparities could deepen. For KPFA Pacifica Evening News, I'm Linda Khoury Umali.
Leading congressional Democrats are reacting furiously to the claim that immigrant women held at a detention center in Georgia are undergoing disproportionate numbers of hysterectomies. In a complaint filed Monday, nurse Dawn Wooten alleges that the Irwin County Detention Center performed questionable hysterectomies, refused to test detainees for COVID-19, and shredded medical records.
You have detained women. I had several detained women on numerous occasions that would come to me and say, Miss Wooten, I had hysterectomy. Why? I had no answers as to why they had those procedures. And one lady walked up to me here this last time around between October of 19 until July the 2nd. And she said, what is he? Is he the uterus collector? Does he collect uteruses? And I asked her, what does she mean? And she says, everybody that I talked to has had a hysterectomy.
Wooten worked full-time as a licensed practical nurse at the private LaSalle Corrections Immigration Jail until July, when she was demoted. A top medical official with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, released a statement vehemently disputing the claims, saying only 2 women have been referred for hysterectomies from that facility since 2018. The doctor is not named in the complaint, but lawyers who represent women at the jail said their clients have been taken to a local gynecologist named Dr. Mahendra Amin. He was previously accused by state and federal authorities of falsely billing Medicare and Medicaid in an investigation that led to a $520,000 settlement in 2015. 137 congressional Democrats signed a letter led by Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal demanding a full investigation into what the letter called horrifying whistleblower allegations of mass hysterectomies being performed on immigrant women by a doctor called the uterus collector. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said in a statement that if true, the appalling conditions described in the whistleblower complaint are a staggering abuse of human rights. Congressman Benny Thompson, Mississippi Democrat who chairs the House Homeland Security Committee, said the panel is conducting an ongoing investigation about the conditions at ICE contractor detention facilities and will be examining these new and incredibly serious allegations. You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast, airs each night at 6 with a half-hour edition on the weekends, and all the newscasts are archived online at kpfa.org. I'm Mark Miracle. More than 24 major wildfires continue to blaze in California, scorching nearly 3.5 million acres, many ignited by some 1,200 lightning strikes. At least 25 people are dead, thousands of homes destroyed. Smoke from West Coast wildfires can be seen in New York and as far as Europe. KPFA's Christina Onnested reports.
Victims of California's deadly wildfires were found in vehicles and roadways. In all, at least 25 people have died so far. 15 people were killed last week in the North Complex fire burning in Butte and Plumas counties. 10 of the bodies have been identified using DNA, including a 72-year-old man found in a vehicle and 2 bodies found in a roadway. 2 people remain missing, according to Butte County's Sheriff's Office. Across the state, more than 3.4 million acres are burning. Governor Gavin Newsom says the number of firefighting personnel battling the blazes is now more than 17,000.
We still have 38,000 plus people that have been evacuated, and again, over 3.4 million acres have burned to date. Still battling these wildfires, over 17,000 firefighters, over 2,200 engines, a mutual aid system that comes not only within the state, but 83 engines now that have come from outside of the state. And what we know, based upon our analysis, as we get back in and we repopulate areas, 4,200, and that's why we say plus, because we anticipate this number to grow, but 4,200 structures so far have been destroyed.
Firefighters as far away as Israel, Canada, and New Jersey are in California, helping to fight back the fires that have some 38,000 people still under evacuation orders. The North Complex in Butte and Plumas counties is 273,000 acres and is 36% contained. To the east of that fire, the largest in state history is burning in Mendocino, Trinity, and Tehama counties. Evacuations remain in effect for the August complex. It's burned nearly 800,000 acres, some 796,000, and is 30% contained. To the south, in the Central Valley, the Creek Fire in Fresno County has grown to some 220,000 acres. It is 18% contained. Evacuations in Fresno and Madera counties have been lifted or downgraded. In the Bay Area, the third and fourth largest fires in state history are close to being fully contained. The North Bay fire, the LNU complex, is 97% contained. It scorched more than 363,000 acres. And the SCU in the East and South Bay is 98% contained. It's burned more than 396,000 acres. Daniel Berlant is a CAL FIRE public information officer.
While there is no fire growth on these fires, and really there is no, at this point, no expected growth in the fires, crews are continuing to monitor the fire, put out hot spots, but more importantly, doing fire suppression repair. So these two fires will likely not get 100% containment values until the end of the month while work is still done here.
Berlant says CAL FIRE will stop providing reports on those two fires as they're nearly 100% contained. The CZU fire in Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties is 93% contained. Berlant says it should be fully contained by this weekend. Evacuations for San Mateo County have been lifted. Some have been lifted in Santa Cruz. While firefighters are gaining headway on some of the largest blazes, weather conditions are bringing more fire weather warnings. That's for this Thursday and Friday for the Sierras, from the Tahoe Basin all the way south to San Bernardino County, due to forecasted high winds. Although a cooling trend is expected in the next couple of days, heat is also then forecasted by the weekend into next week, elevating more fire danger. Dozens of fires are also burning in Oregon, where firefighters say they're making progress on the state's unprecedented wildfires. An incident report says downed power lines sparked at least 13 fires in Oregon during a peak of high winds last week. Reports over the weekend say militiamen were holding gun checkpoints in parts of Oregon as people were fleeing the deadly fires due to an unfounded rumor that Antifa started the blazes. Journalists and others were held at gunpoint. The FBI in Oregon had to send out notices saying those reports were fake. The smoke from dozens of West Coast wildfires is stretching clear across the country to the East Coast. The sun was transformed into a perfect orange orb as it set over New York City Tuesday. Wednesday, New Jersey residents described a yellow tinge to their overcast skies. Experts say the smoke went as far as Europe. Meanwhile, biologists say a massive bird die-off in the Southwest since August is connected to the spate of wildfires along the West Coast. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for KPFA.
Months after the police killing of Breonna Taylor in her own home, the city of Louisville has agreed to pay the black woman's family $12 million and to reform police practices. But Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, said that was just the first step. She wants the officers who killed her daughter prosecuted.
As significant as today is, it's only the beginning of getting full justice for Breonna. We must not lose focus on what the real job is. And with that being said, it's time to move forward with the criminal charges because she deserves that and much more. Her beautiful spirit and personality is working through all of us on the ground. So please continue to say her name, Breonna Taylor.
The state's attorney general is investigating police actions in the March 13th fatal shooting. Attorney Benjamin Crump says the probe is taking too long.
We still are demanding that Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron bring charges immediately against the police officers that murdered Breonna Taylor. Immediately. This week, justice delayed is justice denied.
Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher announced the terms of the settlement in joint appearances with Taylor's mother and Attorney Crump. He said he was deeply sorry for the death. The mayor said the settlement includes reforms on how warrants are handled by police. Other reforms establish a housing credit program to encourage police officers to live in certain low-income areas in the city.
First, to build stronger community connections between our police officers and the people they serve, we will, one, establish a housing credit program to incentivize officers to live in certain low-income census tracts within the city.
Officers will also be encouraged to perform 2 paid hours of so-called volunteer work every 2 weeks in the communities where they serve. The city will also track police use of force incidents and citizen complaints. Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement has asked the Des Moines City Council to intervene in cases where the group feels that protesters have been unfairly targeted by the police force of the city. Mike Moen reports.
In many U.S. cities, relationships have soured between police and protesters who say officers use strong-arm tactics during demonstrations against racial injustice. In Iowa, those tensions are on the rise again. A Des Moines community group is calling attention to a letter sent to a city council member who tweeted concerns about the August arrest of 2 Black Liberation Movement activists. The charges came after a nonviolent protest. Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement claims the letter, which criticized the council members' concerns, was sent by a police union in secret. Group member Sharon Zander-Zakis says it speaks volumes about leadership.
We're looking at who's policing who. Is it the police policing our city elected officials, or is our elected officials able to police the police?
She says this could be viewed as another way to suppress voices. The group says the Des Moines Gold Braid organization sent the letter to avoid a public records request. The Des Moines Register received a copy and confirms the group's claims about the content. The union called the council members' statements unprofessional and said the department's actions were a de-escalation tactic. City officials, including the council member who received the letter, say they have empathy for protesters, but also acknowledge the union's right to free speech. Zander-Zakis says it's disheartening that after some of the summer tension had eased, the union sought intimidation through a backdoor form of communication.
If there's going to be a bridge of repair between community and police, it has to start with transparency.
At various points this summer, police officials and protesters did show signs of unity, but during some of the demonstrations, they clashed with those marching by using tear gas and pepper spray. Mike Moen, Public News Service.
The San Jose City Council voted last night to let the police continue using rubber-coated steel bullets for crowd control, with only Mayor Sam Liccardo dissenting. The acting police chief said that officers needed to be able to defend themselves in riotous situations. Councilmember Raul Perales, a former police officer, warned that without access to less lethal means, police would hit protesters with their batons or end up using their guns.
And then you do put officers in these situations where maybe you're asking them simply to strike somebody with a baton. Or ultimately, in certain circumstances, you may be asking them to use their firearm versus a less than lethal projectile. And I don't think that's the type of limit that we should put.
The vote came after a long discussion of police practices and policies prompted by the at times violent police response to protests that broke out in San Jose following the Minneapolis police killing of George Floyd in May. San Jose police used rubber-coated steel bullets and threw tear gas canisters and stun grenades at protesters. Among the peaceful protesters who suffered injuries was an activist and former police bias trainer, Derek Sanderlin. He was shot in the groin with a rubber bullet while he was trying to de-escalate a confrontation. Community leaders testified, asking San Jose council members to take action.
I am the Director of Compassion and Justice Ministries at the River Church Community and a member of PAC's Beloved Community Team. We urge you to pass a thorough ban on foam projectiles. We unequivocally support the full ban on the use of these projectiles or rubber bullets in all situations in our city. They are classified as non-lethal weapons, but they do cause life-changing harm, and they should not be used in any circumstances.
The San Jose Spotlight reported that at last night's meeting, the council did pass reforms, such as prohibiting no-knock warrants in most cases, prohibiting police from covering their badges, adopting a minimum age at which minors can be placed into handcuffs, and prohibiting the hiring of people who have tattoos or body art that aligns with hate groups. You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings we host Upfront.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m. right after Democracy Now!
On Upfront.
A coalition of voting rights groups in Maryland is urging the State Board of Elections to help eligible citizens vote when they're incarcerated or newly released. Dan Bernard reports.
The groups have outlined a plan to ensure voting rights for people in the criminal justice system, including secure ballot boxes at all correctional facilities. Kiana Johnson is with Life After Release in Prince George's County, one of the groups behind the plan. She's concerned that state and local detention facilities won't uphold the law that gives these folks the right to vote.
It's unacceptable for the state and local officials to not have a plan for individuals who are currently being held pretrial who have not yet been convicted of a crime.
The coalition, which includes criminal justice groups and Maryland's NAACP, wants the board to support nonpartisan educational materials and add voter information and complaint hotlines to local detention facilities' free call lists. Earlier this year, Maryland lawmakers failed to pass a bill that would have put procedures in place to ensure ballot access for people in jail or prison or just released. Tiara Bradford with Common Cause Maryland says it would have been a first step toward putting a vote-by-mail process for them in place.
The legislation we were trying to pass had a reporting system requiring that the State Board of Elections do an annual audit just to see who was voting and making sure that voting process was actually taking place each year for the elections.
About 47,000 Marylanders, either being held pretrial or with felony convictions who haven't completed their probation process, have the right to vote, according to Common Cause Maryland. In 2016, felons regained their voting rights in the state as soon as they leave prison. Support for this reporting was provided by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. For Public News Service, I'm Diane Bernard.
A video altered to make it appear as though Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden played a song disparaging the police was viewed more than 4.5 million times on Twitter by this afternoon. It spread fueled by President Trump, who tweeted it twice. The video, which appears to show Biden playing a controversial song by the rap group NWA during a campaign trip to Florida, was labeled as manipulated media by Twitter, but it continued to circulate widely. In the original video, Biden pulls out his cell phone and plays Despacito, a song by Puerto Rican singer-songwriter Luis Fonsi, who introduced him at a Hispanic Heritage Month event last night in Kissimmee, Florida. The altered video, NWA's F the Police, plays instead. What is this all about? The president first said as he tweeted the video last night. He tweeted it again today, saying, "China is drooling. They can't believe this." Trump retweeted the video from the United Spot, which describes itself as a parody or satire account on YouTube and Facebook, but not on Twitter, where the pro-Trump account has more than 22,000 followers. The account, which often tags the president to make him aware of posts there, was created just earlier this year. Another account closely associated with the United Spot was previously suspended by Twitter. A Twitter spokesperson told the Associated Press that the manipulated media tag was added to the tweet based on the platform's policy on synthetic and manipulated media. The United Spot often airs manipulated videos on its social media accounts, some of them attacking political figures such as Biden, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The United Spot shared the altered video of Biden with the caption, Joe Biden has just one thing to say, and it ain't good. Listen to this. The president retweeted that tweet. Some Democratic Party leaders are getting nervous about the Biden campaign and whether or not it will prevail in the November election. Trump has closed the gap between himself and Biden in the polls since the Republican convention last month. And while Biden continues to hold the edge in most of the key swing states, the margin remains narrow. And Biden is lagging behind Hillary Clinton's numbers in support among the key voting demographics of African Americans and Latinos. Simon Marks reports.
With 48 days to go before America's presidential election, polling data continues to show that Joe Biden has the edge over Donald Trump. Nationally, he enjoys an average 7 percentage point lead. And in the crucial swing states where the election will ultimately be decided, on average, he's 3.7% ahead of President Trump. And yet Democrats worry that Joe Biden isn't sufficiently ahead of the president to have this thing completely wrapped up. Samantha Power was President Obama's U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and she's a supporter of the Biden campaign.
He's not scoring as well with Hispanic voters as Hillary Clinton did. He's not scoring as well even with African American voters. Now, Barack Obama and other, really prominent African American leaders in our country haven't yet really come out the gate. I think you'll see much more of Obama in the next 50 days. That is critical. I mean, you can't see slippage there. And getting oxygen, honestly, Trump is so masterful at controlling the airwaves.
She says she also worries about external interference in the election, not just misinformation on social media, but possible attempts by the Russians to hack into voting machines in key states. Democrats might not be so nervous had they not watched Hillary Clinton's dreams go down in flames 4 years ago, but they've seen this film before and this time hope it has a different ending. I'm Simon Marks.
The Trump administration has agreed to provide in-person briefings on threats to the November election to key members of Congress. Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe agreed to brief the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, backing down from a decision to provide information only in writing. The move comes after significant pushback from Democrats and some Republicans. Lawmakers said the briefings are more important than ever as the 2020 presidential campaign approaches. The nation's counterintelligence chief has warned that Russia appears to be trying to meddle in the election again by denigrating Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. Transgender activist Sarah McBride has won a Democratic state Senate primary in Delaware and is poised to make history as the first transgender person elected to the state legislature. McBride is the favorite in November as Democrats outnumber Republicans in the district by more than 3-1. There are a handful of other transgender state lawmakers in the U.S., but McBride would be the first to hold a state Senate seat. McBride's priorities include paid family leave and medical leave for all workers, reducing costs and increasing competition in the healthcare industry, and strengthening public schools. Here in California, Senator Scott Wiener and LGBTQ advocates are urging Governor Gavin Newsom to sign SB 132, a bill that would require prisons to house transgender inmates according to their identified gender rather than their birth gender. The bill has passed the legislature. It's now on Newsom's desk. KPFA's Daniel Whitty reports.
SB 132 would also allow transgender people to be housed where they feel safest, such as a dorm-style room rather than a cell. Currently, transgender inmates are housed according to their birth gender. A study in 2011 indicated that 40% of transgender people reported sexual assault while in prison. State Senator Scott Wiener explains some of the challenges faced by transgender inmates.
And trans women in particular face huge challenges when they're housed in men's facilities in terms of violence and being victimized. And we know that trans people in prison are much more likely, have a much higher risk of being the victim of violence than the population as a whole, including sexual violence. And so SB 132 will ensure that trans people in prison are treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve as human beings. And that includes being addressed in terms of with their actual name and their requested pronouns.
The bill would also require that transgender inmates be searched based on their gender preferences. Jasmine Jones is a legal assistant from the Transgender and Intersex Justice Project. She explains why this legislation is so important.
I believe this law is forthcoming. I believe the work that has been done behind it is excellent, and it leads to the letter. Although I do believe we must still be vigilant in making sure that CDCR adhere to every word of this bill. And that means that all our brothers and sisters and siblings must be vigilant in knowing to report any time they're not being adhered to this bill. But I do think the coalition is part of this bill and for putting the excellent work into it. And I think this bill is going to go a long way. It's forthcoming, and it keeps a lot of transgenders within the CDCR safe. And I believe a lot of them, the bulk of them, is going to sleep well at night knowing that they will be safe.
Jones said while she was in prison, she was abused by other prisoners and believes that a bill like SB 132 may have prevented that. Bill advocates say it represents choice for the transgender inmates in the state prison system. Tammy Martin is the legislative manager at Equality California. She says SB 132 would also be a gain for the LGBTQ community.
And part of the necessary work to fix our justice system is making sure that transgender people have, at all times, the agency, respect, and dignity that all people deserve. And that has been the driving principle behind this bill. Transgender people have always been at the forefront of the LGBTQ civil rights movement, yet they've often been left out of public policy advancements. So SB 132 is an example of the strength and the resilience of transgender, gender nonconforming, and intersex people. And we are really looking forward to what's next for this critical piece of legislation.
The California Department of Correctional Rehabilitation does not have a position on this bill as of now. The California Department of Correction and Rehab does already have some measures in place for housing transgender inmates, but Senator Wiener says they're inadequate. These measures include providing them with gender-appropriate clothing and also extra training for staff on the proper use of pronouns. Wiener says that he is cautiously optimistic that the governor will sign SB 132. If passed, the bill would go into effect on January 1st. For KPFA News, I'm Daniel Whitty.
Texas's highest criminal court today commuted the death sentence of a Mexican man after agreeing with findings that he was ineligible to be executed because of an intellectual disability. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals changed the death sentence that Juan Lascano had faced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lascano was convicted of capital murder in the November 2005 shooting death of a Dallas police officer. Morning clouds in the San Francisco Bay Area tomorrow, clearing by afternoon with highs in the low 70s around the Bay. Mostly sunny further inland with highs in the mid-80s. In the central San Joaquin Valley tomorrow, mostly cloudy skies with a high near 90 degrees, and mostly cloudy tomorrow in Los Angeles with a high in the low 90s.
This is a community announcement for September 2020. Help is always available on San Francisco Suicide Prevention's Crisis Hotline at 415-781-0500. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. For more information, visit sfsuicide.org or suicidepreventionlifeline.org. This COVID Coping Community Calendar is produced by the First Voice Apprenticeship Program. Please send your listing for consideration to KPFA at 1929 Martin Luther King Jr. Way, Berkeley 94704, or email calendar@kpfa.org. To hear this calendar again, call 510-848-6767 extension 621 or view it online at kpfa.org.